All right, hello, everybody. We're going to go ahead and start right at 6. Did everybody, I know last time we had a few people that had difficulty finding the case. Did everybody find the Matt v. Ohio case here?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Some of it was entertaining. It's an interesting story. I'm going to try real fast. Sometimes when I try to screen to show you guys a picture of Miss Mapp. I think she's a very,
Cool.
very interesting character.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
See if I can share it with you guys. There you go.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
There's Miss Mapp herself.
She's gorgeous.
Yeah.
I know one thing, she was not going to put up with those cops.
Yeah, but why did she have the obscene material for? That's kind of weird.
I know, that is weird
We'll get to that.
for a woman.
It's an interesting fact pattern just because, I mean, what I like the most about her as a defense attorney is that she's on the phone. She's on the phone with her attorney when they come. Like, she's ready.
Yeah.
But you know, usually the cops will tell the attorneys, you can't come in here. You know,
Yeah, exactly.
they usually don't come out on the scene.
You always have to remember, too, this was before cell phones, before speed dial and all that. I mean, she would have to be ready and get that going. So,
Hey, Professor Taylor.
yeah, we're going to get to the facts in a minute, and then we'll cover some of this stuff. But
Well, I wanted to ask you a question.
about the Matt case?
No, it's about our discussion this week.
Oh, okay. Well, let's come back to that at the end. I want to make
Okay.
sure everything we need to cover, and then if people want to stick around, they can stick around, and then we'll
Okay.
But the facts of this case are kind of interesting. So without, and in your other class, I know that Trinity has a class about general legal, reading, things like that. When have you guys learned what IRAC is?
Yeah, that's
Say that again.
issue. You have to deal with the issue. Also, what's it?
Issue, rule, analysis, conclusion.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So at this point, I don't want anybody to tell me the holding. I don't know the rationale. We'll get to that. Let's just anybody feel comfortable with the facts that they read of the case. So just raise your hand and just tell me what's happening. What are the facts that led to Miss Mapp? I saw that picture of why is she even in front of the?
You're kind of going in and out.
Yeah, you're going in and out.
Professor.
I'm not sure why. I can't hear you either, really.
I can't hear you. You're going in and out.
Yeah, yeah.
I can hear you
Some of
pretty
it.
well. I can hear.
Is that better?
I can hear you. Yeah, I can hear you pretty
I'm
good.
not sure why I can't.
You asked us what was the facts of the case that made her go to court and be charged.
And then if you can see, if you can hear me, put a thumbs up. Because if you're all talking, I can't hear. It's too much. If you
Oh.
cannot hear me, put a thumbs down. Can you hear me or no?
You're breaking up.
Yeah, you're breaking up a lot, so I
Mhm.
can't comprehend what you're saying, in other words.
Right.
Professor Taylor, are you on Wi-Fi or are you hard connected to the to your computer?
Is that any better? I tried to restart some things on my. So is this volume any better?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, I just had to restart some stuff on my computer. All right. So what I was asking is, for the map case, does anybody feel comfortable giving us the facts? So not the holding, not the rationale, just the facts. Before anybody talks, you raise your hand and I need to call on you because we have so many people. So Byron, I saw your hand up first. Byron's gonna talk. If you're not Byron, please put it on mute so that we can hear Byron.
Well, the facts of the case were that she was, Cleveland police were called to her residence because they thought there was a wanted person in hiding in the house. And when they knocked on the door, she wouldn't let them in because she said they didn't have a search warrant. And they waited a few hours and then come back with some kind of piece of paper they claimed was a search warrant and broke into her house, forcibly entered her house. And that led to the whole chain of events going on and her being arrested for the obscene material and all that stuff.
And then one of the facts was she took one of the pieces of paper and she hid them inside her dress. And thinking about back in the old days, most women used to hide things in their bra. And that's one of the facts of the case. She was belligerent. She didn't want to let the police in. That was a fact. The police had to come back in and kind of break in. And then she took the piece of paper and hid it on her person, and the police had to wrestle her for that piece of paper. So, and then she was belligerent. So some of the facts of the case is she didn't want the guy that they were after to get caught. She did everything she could do. What is that called when you keep a criminal in your house and you won't let them get covering or?
Covering, yeah. So
Yeah.
perfect. Okay, so so that's good. That's a good rundown. But one of the questions that people have, I think that is fair, is, well, what's up with this obscene material? So it was actually not, Mrs. Mapp had herself and her child living in a home. And in the basement, there was a man who was renting from her and living there. They found these basically like pornographic magazine type things in his area. So it wasn't even found in her room, but it was her house. And from some of the background, it basically is that they tried to get her on some other charges and they couldn't. And so they eventually came after her for these charges because they're just desperate to try to get her for something. So it was a tenuous case at best against her, but it was like a threat on Don King. That's the way back of this too, is the people were involved in like a bombing. So it was this really interesting background. We don't need to get into all that because it's not relevant. But she you know, as Byron refuses to let them in, says you need a warrant. They don't really show her a warrant. So what we're assuming here is a search, right? Now this case isn't actually about as much were her Fourth Amendment rights violated or not. What's the real issue here? And anybody want to take a crack at that? What is the actual issue that the court decided? Now, once again, before you talk, you have to raise your hand and get called on. so that I can make sure we don't have multiple people talking at once. Okay, so Cynthia, and then I'll let Renee talk next.
Yeah, okay.
I think the issue was whether or not the search warrant was actually valid, or whether or not it even existed to begin with, and whether the information that they received for the warrant was even right. Because I think they got it from like some kind of informant, but
Yeah.
you know, who knows who that was, or if they even have the information on that informant or someone to corroborate.
Yeah, I think that's how the whole thing started, you know? I mean, they went to the house because they thought that there was somebody hiding out. Now, okay, but it's like if they thought somebody was hiding out, wouldn't they have gotten a warrant? Unless they know for sure, right? They have to know for sure.
Yeah.
But I
So
think
I want to cut this a little bit short just to make sure I redirect a little bit. Here is something called the exclusionary rule.
Right.
Shortcut us so we can talk about that because that's what we're covering.
yeah.
And that's a,
The court is the exclusionary. So I saw Shelley raise a hand. She wants to talk about the exclusionary. I'm going to let her start, and if anybody else wants to talk, raise their hand next. Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was going to mention. Because the issue was with the evidence that they obtained, if it really violated her Fourth Amendment rights, which protects against unreasonable searches. So that's really what it came down to. What I felt it came down to, though they found evidence and had all these different things against her, or whatever was in the house, it really boiled down to if it should be excluded, if it should even be included, because it was an unreasonable search.
You're saying, well, actually, Alfreda, I'll let you talk, and then
so the majority decision was applied was exclusionary rule because it's a law that prohibits the use of illegally obtaining evidence for a criminal trial. And so that's the exclusionary rule. So because of that, they couldn't use anything because they had no warrants and they did violate her Fourth Amendment. But the exclusionary rule prohibits use of illegally obtaining evidence.
now that I'm ahead, anybody want to, Renee, I see your hand up as well. And then Billy, did you have your hand up? Or I just see that. Okay, well, Renee did. So Renee, go.
Okay, yeah, and they were going in, I mean, they didn't have a warrant, and they were even going into all her stuff that wasn't out in front of them where they could, you know, grab it or whatever, because didn't they go into a trunk or something and find the pornographic stuff? I mean, they weren't even in the right spot in the house, and I mean, I just thought that was pretty nervy. But that all that
If we all agree for purposes of argument, look, there's no warrant. They've searched.
Yeah.
This is in violation of the Fourth Amendment. The question becomes, as Shelley kind of says, well, then what do we do with it? We've got this evidence. And in the times before Matt v. Ohio, there was a difference between federal law and state law. So in federal court, you were allowed, not allowed to use evidence that had been illegally obtained. In state court, you were. So you might imagine, and they'd say this in the Matt case, I think it's an interesting quote that I always like from here. They talk about basically, it says, presently, a federal prosecutor may make no use of evidence illegally seized, but a state attorney across the street may, although he's supposedly operating under the same amendment. So but they can walk across the street and hand it to the state's attorney, and the state's attorney can use it against you. So that was the state of law leading up to MAP, is that if you
that's crazy.
Fourth Amendment rights, you couldn't use it against them in federal court, but you could in the state.
In the state, that's crazy.
So
That's not right. Because the state should be the same with the federal. I thought the state was on the same lines as federal, but
yeah, so Renee, I need to see hands raised so I can make sure I call on people. So Dana, did you have your hand up?
I'm glad you brought that point up, because I was thinking that as I was reading the where it said the Ohio Supreme Court sustained the the conviction, that they were going to allow that to be against her, because I was wondering what was the difference. Was federal going to be separated from state at that time? And that's why it was able to be sustained in the Ohio court. They did. I think that a lot of this stuff that we read, it touched so close to home, because I know people who have been victims of unreasonable searches, but I think it was great that she was able to obtain an attorney in the beginning, given that most general people don't have access to an attorney. But because she was having all these harassment issues, maybe over a time period where they were so anxious to go in her house, there must have been some reported activity that they had been trying to enter to see what was going on anyway. The fact that even the state would go for that violation of the Fourth Amendment, I'm appalled. I'm just really appalled, because we should be upholding the Constitution, whether we're a state entity or a federal entity. We all bound by the Constitution.
That's a great point, and that's you. The court agreed with you on that. And then Anitra and Barbara.
Hi, everybody. I think in this case, one of the biggest thing was her Fourth Amendment violated. And I think, as you was touched on about the federal, I think exclusionary rules at the time only applied to federal and not state at the time. Now, they want to really see if was due process, was her basically due process violated? Was she treated fairly? And which at the time, I don't think she was, because when they couldn't get her to testify against the gentleman, they came after her for the pornography. So basically, that's what the case is about. That her Fourth Amendment had been violated.
Your hand up too.
I'm not sure if you said me, but I couldn't hear you. Okay. I wanted to make a comment on what Dana said about how the state should be the same as the federal. And I believe that the case said that the reason why the Supreme Court of Ohio ruled for or against it was because Ohio had a law that said that the items were not taken by force. And that was the reason why they originally thought that it was okay, because it wasn't taken by force.
I kind of think it was taken by force. They forced their way in.
Yeah, they did.
They had a warrant.
Instead, from the defendant's person. So she didn't have those items on her. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying that's what the holding said. Or it said that the court found that the evidence had not been taken from defendant's person by the use of brutal or offensive physical force against the defendant.
But they tried to take the warrant from her. She put on her and inside her bra.
Thank you.
That wasn't the evidence, though. The evidence of the pornographic.
Evidence seized from her. Interesting.
Right.
They started all like by grabbing her.
Right.
And then that's when it all started.
And that was wrong for them to do that.
They shouldn't have grabbed anything from her, but what they were trying to grab was the fake warrant.
The fake warrant? That's crazy.
And the U.S.
points they said too, a warrant was never produced, and when they asked the attorney arguing in front of the Supreme Court, he kind of evaded the question. And I'm picturing as an attorney, the Supreme Court asking you a question, and you're like, and you just try to distract them, like that's going to work. There wasn't any presentation of the warrant, and this attorney is probably really sweating. I'm going to get asked this question, and I gotta, jazz hands distract him from this issue.
That's funny, because didn't he admit that there really was never a warrant?
He said he had just evaded the question. He didn't.
Oh, okay. He just evaded.
Right.
Like all good, when you don't have the right answer, you maybe try to avoid it. So
Right.
I'm gonna let Alfreda comment on something, and then I'm gonna ask one more question, and then we'll open that up to the
The U.S. Supreme Court did vote 6-3 in favor of MAP. The court overturned the conviction, and 5 justices held that the states were bound to exclude evidence seized in violation of the Fourth Amendment.
I I found interesting in the case is that one of the arguments apparently put forward by the state was that if we evidence that it's going to doing their job, which is a legitimate concern, right? I mean, our laws kind of try to hold this balance between enforcing people's rights, but also giving law enforcement the leeway they need to do their investigations and trying to strike that balance. So there's a quote I wanted to point your it's on the second to last page, right before the concurring opinion. It says, it can't be assumed that as a practical matter, adoption of the exclusionary rule will fetter law enforcement, which means hold them back. It says, basically, federal courts have operated under this rule for half a century, yet it's never been suggested that the FBI has been rendered ineffective or that criminal justice in the federal courts has. We're kind of making that point. Oh, so you guys can't hear when I'm talking? Okay. So
I don't know.
Can you hear me now?
Well, there's a lot of like or something. So.
Okay. I tried to read the quote directly, but one of the quotes in MAP, it's on the second to last page, says that by that argument, basically they didn't buy it. They said, if you're trying to say, is the FBI not able to prosecute people? And I think Billy, right? Because the feds still prosecute plenty of people. And so what they're saying is, look, this rule has been the federal rule for half a century, and they're still convicting people and they're still prosecuting people. And so it's not like by making the exclusionary rule apply to the states, now I guess all the criminals go free. They're like, hey, does the FBI agree with that? Are federal criminals just walking free?
Oh, heck no.
Because so that's kind of their kind of sassy comeback is, oh, well, I guess if, the feds have figured it out, it hasn't broken them, you guys will figure it out too. So the next kind of question that I want to open up to everybody to give you guys something to talk about is, do we think as a class or an individual that the exclusionary rule is fair? If someone's Fourth Amendment rights are violated, but they did it, they're guilty, right? But now on a technicality of the Fourth Amendment, this is going to be kept out. Are people uncomfortable with that? Do we want to make the, do we agree with the exclusionary rule, or should there be some other way to deter Fourth Amendment violations that don't potentially let people walk free? And so Byron, I see your hand up. Anybody else has a hand up, I'll call them after Byron.
Well, you got the good faith exception to the exclusionary rule. And I think that's a very good exception to the warrant requirement. But that would definitely keep people from walking free if it was under good faith, if you know what I'm saying. I hope I'm saying it right, but I'm not really good with words.
In the instance of, let's say, in a hypothetical, bad faith. So someone just doesn't follow procedures and doesn't, the court could, like, for example, in this MAPS case, say, look, we rule that this was unreasonable and this person wasn't in good faith. If it's not done in good faith, are you comfortable with exclusionary rule? So do you think that officer then bears the
yes
brunt of their decision? Or so I'm going to ask Byron because he asked started it. You're a police officer. If someone makes a mistake and it's not in good faith, do you think it's fair then for it to be excluded?
Yes,
I do.
I mean, we got to have rules and laws. I mean, they can't just go in whenever they want.
I need everybody to raise their hand, and then I'll call on you so that we make sure we're not talking. So Byron, you said
sorry.
Yes, I do. I think that's a good way of putting it.
All right. So anybody, let's take a couple hands up. I was going to go. Let's see, Anna. So Anna, Anitra, Barbara, Renee, and then Alfreda. I'll go in that order.
Hi, can everybody hear me? Okay, so yeah, I agree with Byron and what you said, Professor. I think that when it comes to exclusionary rule, and when something is done or get illegally, and even though the person is guilty, I think that there have to be proper ways to do it. So even though it was done illegally and incorrectly, I still think that the exclusionary rule should be. I still agree with it. So regardless if they're guilty or not, I think there should be any procedures to follow.
I'm gonna go Anitra and then I'll go.
Like, the exclusionary rule is there for a reason, because if we don't, the law needs to stand the way it is. If a cop or officer or somebody go in and do something illegally, and that's what they're being trained to do. If they mess up, then, it falls back on them. Nobody wants criminals walking on the street, but if they're not doing right, then how do you tie them to something when it wasn't done correctly? Because we allow them to just go and do things like that, then you got a lot of people, innocent, guilty, all tied in the same thing.
Well, that's a good point. I want to make sure I get to everybody. Let's see. I had Claire and then Barbara, Renee, Alfreda. So I'll keep calling.
Okay, I'm sorry. I agree with Anitra, but I also think about it depending on the circumstances. Let's say we are all human, an officer forgets to, I don't know, whatever procedure it is. And all of a sudden a criminal is walking free. I don't think that's fair either. It all depends, the circumstances and everything of the scenario. I don't think it's fair to hold the police officer or whatever officer accountable and have the criminal walk free. I don't agree with that either. But like I said, it depends on the circumstances.
Like with work, and I think I've said this to some of you in my response, my feedback is, that is the best legal answer, is generally like, it depends. And sometimes I'm asking you guys to draw conclusions, because inevitably, at some point in the law, you have to pick a side, right? Even the Supreme Court has to 5-4 split decisions sometimes. So I don't want you to answer every question I ask you with "it depends." But if we were to get to the truth of it underneath, almost everything has a big "it depends" that we are trying to unpack and come to some sort of conclusion. Okay, so let's see. I had Barbara, Renee, Alfreda, and Dana. So I'll start.
Well, I definitely believe, in law enforcement. I'm not against them at all or anything, but coming from a defense standpoint, part of my job is to find holes in processes, because it protects people who can't protect themselves. So in this case, part of the opinion was that if the government breaks the law, it invites anarchy. And we can't have the law going around having people breaking rights for people when the law says that they can't do that. So I believe in the exclusionary rule 100%. And sometimes there are criminals that do get let go because the processes aren't followed correctly. But if there wasn't any exclusionary rule at all, then, and the government was making all the decisions, then we'd have a lot more problems than what we do.
That's a good point. I want to make sure I get to her. Let's see. I had Renee, Dana, and Alfreda, right? You all three still want to?
Yeah, I do.
We'll go Renee, and then Alfreda, then Dana.
Yeah, Barbara, good point. Very good point, because the cops, no matter what, need to have rules too. Or we need to have set laws also that, it just depends. It doesn't really have to do with it depends. It's a law with them too, the exclusionary rule. But I mean, I think it's a good thing and it needs to stay there. And I'm glad the states have it, because they should all be the same across the board. I mean, it's weird to me that the states have different kind of laws anyway, but along the same line as federal, but still that needs to be there, or she's right, there's going to be anarchy. I mean, it's not going to work. And if the guy is guilty, I mean, look at all the innocent people in prison, in jail. That's a different story, I know.
There's a bigger, if any of you could take in like a con law, there's a bigger, much bigger behind this case argument of states' rights, right?
Yeah.
Anything to do with criminal law, so we're not going to talk about that. Just know that the kind of overhanging this issue is a bigger constitutional issue, and people feel very strongly about this both ways of states should be in charge of themselves. Don't tell us what to do, big government feds. Or flip side, people who think we should have uniformity. And so this is a much bigger constitutional issue that sometimes this kind of hits on, and it brings that out, and people feel that, yeah, I think we should be able to do our own thing, or I think it should all be uniform. That is an indication of where you'd probably fall on that much bigger, longer than we have to talk about issue. So I'm gonna let Alfreda, Dana, and then I see Russell and Byron.
I was going to ask you a question because this case is back in 1961, and now they have appointed certain agencies to oversee certain cases so they can get the warrants for the rest, which is presently in 2019. But I agree, yes, they should, because it will prevent anyone coming into your home unless they do have a search warrant. But I'm thinking about the case in 1961. You had everybody coming into your house at that time, and they weren't assigned to certain agencies. But now you have the FBI, the CIA, and you have special forces that are allowed to handle certain crimes in which they can get the search warrants in the middle of the night or early in the morning. So to me, based on this time period in 1961, it probably was a mistake, an error which cost them the case. But presently now, I don't think we have to worry about that because, of course, you have to get a search warrant in order to go into someone's house to do anything that you have to do. But I'm thinking because of 1961, was it something that was because of you being the teacher? I was going to ask you, because this case was in 1961, do you think a lot of the agencies was aware of you had to get a warrant to search people's places, or they weren't?
Yes, I think that the difference was the states weren't, there was no downside. If you're a state, if at this point in time, if you are working for a state agency and there is no exclusionary rule and your evidence is going to be used no matter how you obtain it, I think people knew that. And then subsequent to this case, there was probably, and all the law enforcement people in here can probably corroborate this, they're retrained very often on updates in the law. So when a law changes that's going to affect the way they need to do their job, train them or give out information and send, my husband, sometimes the DA office will write things to give to law enforcement to tell the officers, here's how we want you to do things. So they do a lot of learning and keeping up with the law. So most of the time, law enforcement is very aware of every change in the law because it really affects them on a day-to-day basis. And so they will, at this time, yeah, state police wouldn't have been trained on that. But after this case, they would have had to reach officers on some things, is my guess.
Oh, okay, because they said this case was one of the highly, this is what made the decision, the U.S. Supreme Court, this is one of the things that changed the course of getting warrants issued, this case right here.
And the warrant procedure might have been the same. It just might have been that people weren't following it as much for the state because there was no reason to.
Okay.
It could have come in anyways, which is what they don't want people to disregard the law, so they're making a consequence.
So when they say it's a landmark decision, this was one of the landmark decisions. Was it because it was something so big that it made everybody else aware?
Yeah, I mean that it changed the course of the way that was being litigated in state courts vastly. I mean, it probably, and it, I don't know in what the qualification is for landmark, but the reason this is probably considered a landmark is just because it affected the way the Fourth Amendment, in terms of, like I said, evidence that once would have been there, poof, it's gone. Can't use it. That's a pretty big difference in the people trying these cases and using that evidence on a day-to-day basis. So I'm going to make sure, I saw
Thank you.
Dana, and then Russell, and then Byron.
Okay, my thing is the law can't be a bully when they choose to be one. If because we're a Christian school and we're supposed to be finding biblical concepts about things too as well, I'm gonna go to Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 down to 5, and it talked about pulling a plank out of your brother's eye and you got one in your own eye, how you gonna break the law and be mad because somebody else is breaking the law? That is and it says, you hypocrite, that you are not following the rules, but you expect for somebody else to follow the rules. That's like a leader saying, don't commit adultery, but you're the biggest person on the other side committing adultery. We either gonna follow the law or we not gonna follow the law. And you, because you're the police and the enforcer, don't make you no different from an everyday citizen. You need to be able to follow the law just like everybody else. And if it's important to you, this case or getting this person is important to you, then obtaining the proper warrants and stuff to go into that place is what you should do. It's a way that everything should be done. I don't think that violation, and I know that some people get away with things, but there are many people who don't get away with anything because you go in their house, they don't have access to a lawyer, they barely can read or they can't write, and just because they're in a situation at the wrong time, they're violated and they have rights. These are people. And so if you are really supposed to be paid to protect and serve, then you need to do what's right too. Uh-oh. I can't hear you.
I like it. I can tell that you're passionate when you share, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. I had Russell and then Byron.
Can you hear me all right? Okay. Well, the exclusionary rule, I agree that we can't overstep our bounds when it comes to law enforcement. At the same time, we can't let, we can't let people just go free after they have committed an atrocity and just let the cards fall as they may. I think that the biggest thing here is the difference between the federal and the state. I mean, that's what the entire Civil War was about. It was about the rights that we had as states to govern ourselves, and the federal government coming in and basically like a bull in a china shop, I think it's called. They just come in and wreck everything that the state has. And we've seen that with the Common Core, where the federal government comes in and tells us, you have to teach this, you have to teach that. And they got these ridiculous, absurd ways of teaching it. And when just the common sense, which I know isn't very common anymore, but common sense would say, this is our neighborhood. We should know what we're doing here. And we should not be dictated to by a government that doesn't know what's going on. So while we need to dot all the I's, cross all the T's, make sure that we've got enough evidence or enough reason to get the evidence. We can't overstep our bounds, but at the same time, we can't let the guilty go free.
Interesting. And that's, Russell, you could have written part of this dissent, because that's basically what the dissent says is, look, it's a state rights issue and we know best. Like you said, it's our neighbor. We only in those, intimate, close state relationships can they know what the issues are. So the dissent isn't saying, hey, let's violate the Fourth Amendment. Like, it's cool, guys. All they're saying is, don't tell the states what to do. So it's not an issue of that the dissent thinks we should be violating people's Fourth Amendment. They're just saying, I don't think that you as a federal government know what these states are up against. You don't know what crimes they're dealing with, the populations they're dealing with. You don't know anything. Leave it up to them, and they can decide how they're going to deal with this. But it's a dissent because you didn't win. So that's not our law. But
And we couldn't leave it up to the to the states either, because when it came to the Civil War, a lot more was fought for pertaining to the rights of colored people. You know, it was a lot that the government, we were given our right to be free, but the states refused to give us our freedom. So therefore, we had to go to a war.
And just to time out, guys, I know, like I said, this is a constitutional law issue that's much, we can't get into
the feds
but Byron had his hand up. I want to make sure I give him a chance.
Okay, I was trying. It was messed up. I haven't researched the dates or anything on this thing, but I was thinking, what about the supremacy clause? Was it before Map v. Ohio or after?
Guessing if it was already in, I mean, the reason the Supreme Court had to decide this is clearly because it wasn't a moot point, right?
Yeah.
So if this had been an easily solved controversy, it wouldn't have made it up this far. So my guess is no, that constitutionally this was still very much an issue, because if it was moot, which means it's already been decided or it's already worked itself out, as you know, cases take years to get to the Supreme Court. So sometimes they are moot by the time they get there. But I'm guessing that this made it there and they chose to publish it means that it wasn't made moot by any other laws.
And I was going to say something. I was going to reply to Russell. You know, the thing is not all criminals get to walk free, because sometimes the judge will say without prejudice. So that means we can go back and refile our case. So not always do the criminals get to walk free.
Byron would probably agree.
That's true.
That just like, unfortunately for lawyers and police officers and everybody, only our mistakes make it into case law. If we all do everything perfect, the cases don't make it to the Supreme Court. So when you see, terms like ineffective assistance of counsel, that means an attorney messed up. Or if you see cases getting thrown out in exclusion, that means that. So I think every job, right, people make mistakes. But we have high stakes jobs where you mess up, somebody might take your butt to the Supreme Court and your name might get published as the person who messed something up. So judges, attorneys, police officers, for the most part, everybody truly does want to do it the right way. If you don't believe that because you don't think people are just inherently good inside, people don't want to ruin their careers by getting their name published in one of these things, or by having, if a judge makes a ruling that isn't sound and they get appealed, how do you think that looks for them? It looks bad. It looks like you're act in the face by the court above you. So most people, including police officers, really want to do things the right way because it disadvantages their career, if not for the other fact that they just want to do the right thing.
Yeah, but a lot of the times this is somebody else's life too.
Well, I think some people have a hard time believing that, and the justice system is broken in a lot of ways, but I think for the most part, out of many reasons, but one of which is people don't want, if you don't do things the right way and someone appeals you or takes it up, it's not going to work. And so people want to do a good job. They want to gather the evidence the right way, the right way. Most people are out there trying to do it. I think people purposefully violating is more rare, but those are the cases that get in the news and those are the cases that get published. And so there's a lot of cases out there where everybody's doing things right. We're not going to read those. We're not going to learn about those. Those are boring. We're only going to learn about things like this, which, sometimes can lead us to believe, well, man, are all these mistakes being made? Not all the time, but it just happens that we are reading mistakes over and over. And so we get some of the heat sometimes. Police get the heat sometimes. Judges get the heat sometimes. Part of the goal. Go ahead, Renee. You said you want to say something.
I forgot now what I was going to say. I was sitting there listening to you. But yeah, I agree. I mean, but you were talking about the feds and the states wanting their own laws. The feds also have a 98% conviction rate too. I mean, that's something to look for. And the states doing it their own way. I get that. But I mean, sometimes their way is not always, I don't know. It just seems like anyway, sorry. My husband likes to add his 2 cents. Anyway. Hush. Anyway, but yeah, I don't know. I just think it needs to be the same across the board. But I get it. Every state's different, and there's different laws. But I don't know. I just feel like there was an article in the paper, and this is kind of an example, but they're talking about that when kids are killed or kidnapped and murdered, like I can't remember her name, Klaus in Wisconsin, and they killed her parents and took her, the guy. You hear about white kids because it doesn't happen, and then there's so many African American kids and Hispanic kids that you don't hear about, that it happens all the time, and it's just because they don't call the cops like white Caucasian people do. And there's so many more African American kids. Yeah, and it's because they don't trust the police to call them. And
I don't think that information is accurate. I grew up in an African American community.
We need to raise hands.
I read this in the U.S. I think it was called U.S.
She's talking about an article. But
I read this. This is what this guy said.
Yeah.
But you got to understand, my sister was a police officer and in Chicago.
Can we have to pause this, Anitra? Or sorry, Alfreda? I need everybody to.
I don't trust the cops either.
Anyway, I'm sorry.
If someone's not raising their hand, then I just can't let them talk is the only problem, because then we're all talking over each other. So,
no, I'm just saying, I read this. I read this in like a newspaper. I read it online because I like to read the news online.
Okay, so I want to take a time to this is interesting. However, we got to get back to the exclusionary rule, because that's what we're studying today. This is, like I said, some of these things are interesting topics, but I have one more question I want to ask about the exclusionary rule, because that is what we're supposed to cover today. My question, which people can respond if they want to, is, do we think that other remedies would work? And so, for example, if someone willfully seizes evidence and that evidence violates someone's Fourth Amendment right, can we fine that person? Do we demote that person? Is there some other remedy that anybody thinks would be effective? And the reason I ask this is because this is something that's put out there. Someone say, instead of the exclusionary rule, there's other options.
Oh, okay.
Very serious. Yeah. Should there be something else that we do before we exclude this? Are we jumping straight to throw it out and we're not maybe trying out a less severe option? So Billy had her hand up, Shelley, and then I'll go back around.
Thank you. I found it interesting in some of the opinion that it talks about this. I think it's a concurring opinion, because it talks about if there should be a disciplinary action with the police officer, or even if the police officer should be tried for trespassing in there, which is absolutely, I don't know, that's kind of out there. But I hate to say it depends, but it does depend on the situation and maybe the intent of the police officer, and if it's done with malice, or if it's done, if they thought that they did everything. But if they knowingly did something wrong, then I do believe a police officer should be held responsible for that. And maybe then possibly in a civil court outside of the criminal. Yeah. Just a thought.
Mm-hmm. So, is it in addition to excluding it or in lieu of excluding it that you would recommend that?
I would say probably in lieu of, but I'm on the prosecution side of things. My mind is, and so that's hard for me to separate that sometimes.
Can you hear me okay? Okay. I would actually, to build off of that, I would say in addition, instead of in lieu, only because I feel if you do other things like criminal demotion and all that stuff, it seemed like it would negate the whole Fourth Amendment rights that we have. So why even have it if we're going to do something in lieu of it? So I think if we add anything, I do feel that there should be some type of disciplinary action for the ones that actually violated it. I mean, unfortunately, you know what needs to be done. It's nothing new. You need to follow what you need to follow to get what you need for your case. So I would definitely say stick with the exclusionary rule and have additional disciplinary action.
Alfredo was going to talk, so Alfredo, you're up. And then if anybody wants to talk next, raise your hand. We'll have time for maybe one more question, and then I'm going to.
I just was thinking that keep educating the different agencies and the police department, because everybody makes mistakes and man is only human. So I think that just educating, updating the officers and the agencies of getting a search warrant before you go out there, I think continuously educating them will prevent this from happening.
Anybody else have any final? Russell, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I want to agree with Alfreda there. You know, as we say, it's we don't say that we're practicing law. We're not. We're practicing medicine. You know, it's not a finite and written in stone law that we absolutely cannot break. There are some things that, and I'm not saying intentionally, if you don't intentionally, or how should I say it? If you make a mistake, it shouldn't be as massive as throwing a case out if it was a reasonable mistake. But if it was a willful mistake, the person could, I mean, all the way up to termination. You know, if a police officer does not go by the book and just goes out there kicking down doors and not caring what he does, then yeah, the guy should be fired, because that's a rogue cop and nobody likes a rogue cop. So, but with the question of the, I don't think that we should change what we've got right now because it is working. You know, I think Renee said that federal is like at 90% or 98%. State, if you do the right, if you, like I said, dot the I's and cross the T's, people are pretty smart not to mess something up. I mean, it's like, we've got this guy, we think that he killed somebody. Yeah, let's just mess it up so that he goes free.
I think, like I said, most of the things that are unintentional would fall under what Byron mentioned at the beginning, which is a good faith exception, which we don't have time to get all into today. But that's kind of what you guys are seeing, or what your gut is telling you on this. Of, well, it doesn't seem fair if it's a total accident. The law kind of recognizes that if something is done in good faith, that can be an exception. And we want to create a space where we're not slamming, police officers who make an honest mistake and letting people walk free. We try to walk that tightrope through the good faith. And we don't have time, like I said, to get to all that today. But one thing I wanted to say is I'm going to email out something for everyone to read. There is an article, number one, that I read that's really interesting about the Fourth Amendment. And then the other is the real case for Mr. Gonzalez Luzon, who we talked about, the guy who says, it's not me. I wasn't the kingpin. All right, I was me. I was the kingpin. I did murder this guy. That guy, the talker, he is, that's a real case. And the real case is kind of interesting. So I'm going to send that out to everybody so that you can take a look at that. Just in your free time, reading extra cases if that's what you want to do. But I'm going to send those two things out just to kind of, I'll post them just so everyone can kind of take a look at them. So just keep an eye out for that. And in terms of the assignments, is everybody feeling like they're understanding, getting everything? No major catastrophic issues happening? Okay. Good. It seems like I've gotten very good content from everybody, so it seems like people are getting it. Anna, you had a question, then Byron, I know you had a question too.
Yeah, Professor, I just have a question. So when you put word count like 150 to 200, if we go over the word count, is that okay with you, or do we have to have the maximum word count?
No, word count, it's a minimum. The maximum is fine. Now, I think I made a joke about this one, like, you don't need to write like 1,000 words, but I mean, if someone's like, look, it takes me 300, 400 words to say what I want to say, that's fine. If you're not writing a Russian novel, I'll keep reading. And it's more about quality is more what I'm interested in, right? And that's one of the reasons why we even have word count is if you're saying under the word count, or if you're using a bunch of quotes and the quotes take up 100 words and then you write 50, I'm not getting to see you. So that's what it's more about. But for that reason, the maximum doesn't concern me, but it won't necessarily get you more points if you're just, writing to write. But if it's something important and you want to say it, go ahead.
Just say it, girl.
Because of the time, I want to let anybody that, if you don't have any questions and you want to check out now, that's totally fine. If you have any questions and want to stick around, that's fine too. And
sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say you were talking about the police had they had the right reasons to do what they do, and there is, I read that rule, and I think you said it, I don't remember, the good faith exception or something. Yeah, that does protect the ones that mean right, but yeah. I mean, 'cause it seems like there's a law for every little thing, because there are going to be other things that happen that, you know what I mean? Like you said, the good faith exception. There's going to be stuff like that happen, and it's not exactly an exclusionary rule, but and
the kind of key thing and people want to think of for that is an honest mistake, right?
Yeah.
By the evidence we can judge, maybe was something like that, but yeah, I mean, that's the purpose of it, is to catch those cases where we don't want to go to this extreme exclusionary rule. We don't think that's necessary, and that might be one of the reasons, because it was done in good faith. So, and we'll get to some of this stuff in the reading. I mean, the reading, as you guys have all noted, it's a very brief book, right? I have done thicker books and people didn't like it. So the book that I do for crim law, nobody likes that book. It's just hard to find another one. Some of you read that book. It's very dense. It's not great and easy to understand. This book is more like a study guide, but it's really easy to understand. And I think it helps. Reading cases is what we're going to do separately. But this book isn't like full of a bunch of case law. So if there is something in the book that you think is interesting, sometimes the book references a case. You can read that case too, because this is like a very high level view of the law. We're just getting a rule statement, so to speak. The cases that discuss and that form these rules sometimes flush these out in a more meaningful way. So if there's anything that you have questions about, one of the things I recommend to people is if it's something in the book that has a case next to it, read the case. You might get to see the court's rationale in that case and it go, oh, okay, that makes sense. Now I see why that rule is what it is. So if there's a case reference, and if you can't access the case, you can always let me know and I can send it to you, although Google has pretty much everything now. Okay,
is that the attorney that wrote the book? I'm sorry.
Byron has a question, but I was going to let everyone else that doesn't want to stick around go ahead and leave. I felt bad, but I don't know what time it is. Some of you, I know it's really late.
I was the discussion we had on the New York Stop and Frisk case.
Yeah.
The link you sent, they wanted me to subscribe to the New York Times before I could finish reading the link.
Oh no, really?
Yeah, so I had to go to another site to find the case.
I'll make
my discussion may be a little bit different from.
That's what I did. Yeah.
Well, you guys didn't know that I work for the New York Times and I get paid for each subscription. So I'm just I'm funneling you all there as a side gig.
Okay.
I'm sorry for that.
No.
I'm sorry you did with the New York Times.
No, we'll get that fixed. We'll get, because that happens sometimes in the they put limits or they'll take an article down. So that's a popular enough ruling that I'll be able to find that article somewhere else.
Can't we get on law, look up cases or whatever?
I don't mean, does Trinity give you that capability?
I thought did.
I
But
don't
maybe
have the
not.
answer. They
Yeah.
gave me the capability. I saw something. If you have any questions, I can give you a case.
So who wrote that book? Our book that we're reading, is that Abramson? That's an attorney in California.
Yeah, and I think he's got some people that write it for him.
Is it, oh, it's a man. I thought it was a woman. I thought Leslie Abramson was a woman.
I actually don't even. I don't have the book. I mean, I just
She represented the Mendez brothers, and
I haven't even looked in their back. But there's those
I don't know.
guides for every topic. So what they do is they have somebody help them, because you're not an expert in every area of the law, but you would have somebody who's expert in the area help you write that particular book. But it's like I said, it's not a detailed book, but it's an easy read. And for most people working who have a lot on their plate, I think it's better to
I agree.
reading to the minimum, so that you're not spending too much time doing that. You're spending more time processing it, because
Yeah,
most people learn more by talking about it and writing about it than just reading.
Hey, Professor Taylor, I wanted to tell you that our last live session, you inspired me to look at myself. When you said something about being an originalist to the Constitution.
Have you found an identity as an originalist?
Yes, I have. Justice Scalia. Me and him are neck and neck with stuff.
What was it that you found, Byron?
So we were talking about that being something to the Constitution is like the Bible. It's similar to the Bible. Some people feel that.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
It is. Not open to interpretation or change.
I went and I researched some of Justice Scalia's cases, and I realized that I like him.
Yeah.
Because he was an originalist.
Yes.
And he was conservative, and he believed in the Constitution and the rule of law. And
the framers.
He's got great opinions. His opinions are really good.
He is he was a very interesting personality as well. And I think it's rare that you get people that are it's smart, but still, and he has a lot of personality, and it comes through in his writing. So even though I didn't always agree with some of Scalia, I really enjoyed reading him, because he is he reads like, very full of his personality. It sounds like him. He's got a good voice.
Yeah, and I just found that me and him are we coincide so much together, and I just love reading his articles and his conclusions and opinions.
I'm sure they have a T-shirt out there for that.
Oh, buddy. You need to get one.
Scalia posse something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll look for that.
Next class.
Thank you very much.
That would be good.
All right. Good night, everybody. Have a good night.
You too.